Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All right, so if you would turn to page number 173, paragraph 2. To start, let's start from the paragraph earlier where it all starts. So conversely, yeah, page number 172, so that we get the flow. Did we have Abhidhamma last week? No, we didn't. Yes. Okay. So there was something that I had to sort of, I think from the session last time, something that I was meaning to tell you, but then we had to cancel. I cancelled. With regards to consciousness, and memory. So karma, memory, right? We know that consciousness does not, or stops processing, stops happening at two distinct events, whilst or before we attain complete nibbana after death. Apart from that, or before that, we experience, or being experiences or could experience the stopping of consciousness, or the halting of consciousness for a certain amount of time in two specific occasions. The first one is being within or being born into the plane of asanna satta. And the second one is being or entering into Nirodha Samapatti, right? In these two occasions. Because of these two occasions, right, now we know, we have discussed that before, or karma, we discussed earlier that karma, memory are parts and parcel of, or functions of, the consciousness, right? Or it sort of has its, or this flow sort of continues within us through consciousness itself. However, this is disputed now with the fact that the asanna satta body and the Nirodha Samapatti body, the physical body, is maintained by an energy, right? Is maintained by an energy. We know this because obviously even in Nirodha Samapatti, we are seated cross-legged in Nirodha Samapatti. And remember when Sariputta was attacked by a demon, right? Who sort of really whacked on his head, but Sariputta did not realize this even. However, the sound was so loud that the monks from around came and sort of inquired, "Are you all right?" And he said, "Oh, I'm all right. What happened?" and the monks explained, "Oh, we heard a sound like this. It seemed like this sort of inhuman attacked you while you were in sort of meditation." And Sariputta says, "Oh, I didn't feel anything, and there's nothing that has happened to the body." Also, there were certain other instances where the forest around the monk had burnt down. However, the body of the monk did not burn. It was protected by, it is said, by the power of the Nirodha Samapatti. Right? Also, we are not going, regardless, if you put aside Nirodha Samapatti, the posture, when you are in Samadhi, the posture of the body, is automatically maintained by the power of samadhi, by samadhi chitta, right? By samadhi chitta. Now, if consciousness stops, right? We are saying consciousness stops or halts because in those specific instances of Nirodha Samapatti and Asana Satta, consciousness is not there. However, karma maintains the body. Where does that energy come from? From the chitta, from that karma chitta of the consciousness. That maintains the body throughout that span of existence or throughout that time of meditation, right? So then, where karma exists, consciousness does not exist, right? Karma exists, consciousness does not exist, right? So then what does that hint at? That hints at two different wave frequencies, as me and Dhamsri were discussing, two different wave frequencies. We are saying like a wave frequency. We are not calling it a wave frequency, but like a wave frequency. But two different frequencies which happen or prolong or continues as we do live. So karma seems to be on a not within, but rather it seems like a flow that happens almost independent of the consciousness, right? Of the consciousness. This is again sort of hinted by the fact now, for example, there are certain karmas because of powerful karmas. For example, the Buddha has passed, 2,600 years have passed, the world has changed. However, we find ourselves, Buddhists, non-Buddhists, equally respect the Buddha, right? Respect the memory of the Buddha, respect the teachings of the Buddha, respect the holy places of the Buddha. We do that, right? Still, right? So much so that some people would even go into debt to sort of perform certain kusala karmas that out of the belief in the Dhamma or out of the belief that they have towards the Buddha, right? Now, there is a type of karma which categorically says that the karma, the powerful karmas developed by an individual affects the memory, the body of the individual even after the demise of that individual, right? Even after the demise of the individual. Now, for example, we know not all monks are respected, right? Some monks are very well respected. Sometimes they don't even do much, still very respected. Some monks, they do a lot, still not much respected. Maybe, I'm talking in a wholesome sense. They are all, we're not talking about unwholesome, we're talking about wholesome. Some, they don't do much, but still they're very much respected. Some others, they do a lot, but not as much respected, but both are wholesome. Now, for example, a good example might be Venerable Abhidhamma Thero, Phanudiri Abhidhamma Thero, Somahandro. Now, the amount Maho Sumedha Thero, there are so many reverends of this sort who were respected even after they died. The amount of respect, the amount of adoration that their bodies received, right? That their bodies received. Now, this is explained to say, now, for example, the Buddha is, of course, a prime example. 2,600 years after, we are still respecting the Buddha. We are still celebrating his birthdays. We are still celebrating his enlightenment. This is the power of the Buddha's karma still affecting, giving rise even after the demise of the Buddha, right? And that's a type of karma on its own. So what does that again hint at? It hints at the fact that karma can exist at a different frequency almost, right? Individual or apart from that consciousness or body itself, right? However, because of the units of craving, because of the attachments of craving, because of the attachments to being, this karma is akarma. This karma, I'm guessing it has a sense of a sort of a magnetic pull almost, right? Like the polar opposites, which has this electromagnetic field almost, which keeps its karma as our karma, right? But that was something that through the discussion, remember I told you I'm going to ask a friend. So that is something that sort of arose after that conversation with the friend. So which I want to tell you, because earlier, remember, I spoke of karma and memory as a part of the consciousness, or rather a function or feature. But it really seems now that it actually exists independent of it, right? Especially karma. All right. So moving on. Okay. Any questions anyone might have? Okay. All right. So page number 172, last paragraph. Conversely, a desirable, neutral, or a very desirable object is encountered through the force of wholesome karma, and the resultant chittas in the cognitive process, and the resultant chittas in the cognitive process will be generated by the maturation of this wholesome karma, right? Of this wholesome karma. In this case, the same four resultant positions will be occupied by the wholesome resultants. These chittas will generally be accompanied by equanimity, except that body consciousness is accompanied by pleasure. And in the experience of extremely desirable object, investigation and registration are accompanied by joy, right? We went over it the week before. Now, when the object is undesirable, the function of registration is exercised exclusively by the unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness. When the object is undesirable, right? Undesirable. The tadalambana will be of unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness. Registration in regard to a moderately desirable object is exercised by the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness, accompanied by equanimity, or by one of the four great resultants accompanied by equanimity. Both are possible. Why? Because it is omaka, weak, right? Moderate, right? So what it means is when the object registration in regard to when the object is moderate, right? Moderately desirable, so not so desirable, right? That object would be processed, or in the processing of that object, two options. There can be two ways by which that object is processed. Upekha sagata maha vipaka, and the upekha sagata, equanimity registration in the equanimous registration in the ahetuka, right? So in both these ways, that object can be cognized, right? Can be cognized. Now, when the object is very desirable, registration is generally performed by investigating consciousness, accompanied by joy, or one of the four great resultants by joy. So, Manasa Sagata Mahavipaka. Right? Now, what is this saying? It is saying, it is speaking to the amount of karma. It is speaking to the amount of karma that has given way or made it possible for this type of cognition to take place. Right? For this type of cognition to take place. Do you understand? Right? So if the object is weak, if the karma is weak, right? then the object which is cognized, or if that object which is cognized is a weak object, the karma which supports or the resultant which supports it is also going to be somewhat weak. Right? How this mechanism happens is not explained. How this switch happens is not explained. Rather, it is spoken of by power of Chitta Niyama. Right? By power of Chitta Niyama. But we understand that when the object is something which is favorable and good and powerful, then joy comes in. When the object is weak, upekha. Okay? When the object is weak, upekha. Now, moving on. It should be noted that while the resultant chittas are governed by the nature of the object, the javannas are not. It should be noted that while the resultant chittas are governed by the nature of the object, the javanas are not, but vary in accordance with the temperament and the proclivities of the experiencer. What do we have to say about this? How is this possible? Because, does anyone want to have a go? Because I'm asking the question and answering the question. It doesn't seem fair. Right?
Bhante,
Yes,
is it because in this kind of position we can make use of the wise contemplation or the yoniso manasikara?
Well, we really, okay, I know.
Not at this point, sorry, not at this point. As part of my meditation, I can consider, contemplate things that we generally consider bad, as it's neither bad or good, it's just what it is. And then when...
Your answer is correct, Chamari.
Okay, okay.
Your answer is correct. Right? But the thing is, if you take away the we choose part, then it's completely...
Of course, yes. Right? There is not a we to choose.
There is no choice.
Yeah.
There is no choice. The cause and effect is what gives rise to that.
Yeah.
Causes, which, of course, we take the object, or the object is manifested through the bases, and then in the sort of the getting to know of the object, we have this part where our conditions comes into play with the manodwara vachanas, or the vottapanas.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. So Chamri answered it. Okay. Now, moving on. It should be noted that while the resultant chittas are governed by the nature of the object, the kusala chitta is governed, the resultant chittas are governed by the resultant of the governed by the nature of the object, the javanas are not, but vary in accordance with the temperament and the proclivities of the experiencer. Right? So, for example, now we know if we take Shwedagon Pagoda, right? Now, Shwedagon Pagoda, there's a lot of gold there. There's a lot of diamonds there. There's a lot of gemstones there. There's a lot of, it's literally covered in gold, right? We know people who would go to Shwedagon Pagoda and they would say, oh my gosh, how wonderful of a meritorious act this is. And then we have people who would say, oh gosh, I mean, this money could have used to feed so many villagers and poor villagers. You know what I mean? Right? Now, in both those instances, there are two different, now that resultant thought is a manifestation of whatever causes they have, each individual. We are not going to decide who's right and who's wrong. Each individual has causes which gave rise to different interpretations of the scenario, or different sort of after effects of the scenario, right? That is because the object is the object. However, because of that Vottapana process, right, we now put in our sort of twist to things. Right? Now in meditation, with higher awareness, we become aware of that process. Now we don't go to put our twist to things because we don't need to put our twist to things to understand something. We can understand something as it is, right? As it is. So that is a bit of a practice. But here, then you understand how this works here, isn't it? Right? Because remember, the mind plays a part before the Javana, or before we move on to Javana, the mind plays a part where it now comes into play to take over the processing of the object, right? That mind carries our identity, our beliefs, our sort of, yoniso manskara, ayoniso manskara, our conditions, right? All right. Now, even when the object is extremely desirable, the javanas may occur in the mode of indifference as wholesome or unwholesome chittas accompanied by equanimity, right? Even when the object is very desirable, right? For example, at the sight of the Buddha, a skeptic may experience chittas accompanied by doubt, right? Now, by doubt. While at the sight of a beautiful woman, a meditative monk may experience wholesome chittas accompanied by aversion and displeasure to arise towards a very... Oh, sorry, I jumped. I jumped. Sorry. I was like, what? Okay. So, while at the... No, skeptic. Okay. While at the sight of a beautiful woman, a beautiful woman, a meditative monk may experience wholesome chittas accompanied by knowledge and equanimity, right? With knowledge and equanimity. It is even possible for javanas accompanied by aversion and displeasure to arise towards a very desirable object. That is clear, no? The object is very desirable. However, if at moments we do not own it, or we can't have it, or it is disrupting a process within ourselves, we feel now agitation towards that object. Now the processes or the consciousnesses which relates to the initial part of the chitta vritti are not the same consciousnesses which relates to the after parts of the chitta vritti, right? Or rather the middle parts of the chitta vritti, or the javanas. Yeah, understood? Clear? Okay. If it's not, I would be glad to explain again. Okay. So let me know if you want me to. Again, towards an undesirable object, the javanas may occur in a mode normally appropriate for a desirable object. Thus, a masochist may respond to physical pain with chittas rooted in greed and accompanied by joy. Got it? Right? Now, I think we can draw parallels in this regard, because now we speak a lot about reality because of our practice, because we try to sort of practice. This is a word that I often use, reality. And this kind of points out at that reality, right? Where there is a reality, a true reality of object, right? And then there is that which we make out to be, right? So something which could be by nature undesirable, we take as desirable when we are unaware or not trained, or something which is undesirable could be taken as something which is desirable. Again, when it is untrained, the mind is not disciplined in that way, right? So now we understand through Abhidhamma here, it points out to what are we truly referring to as reality. Then as consciousness, it is the consciousness which manifests itself when the object presents itself. That is reality. Because that consciousness, through the power of karma, manifests to support the arising, or in a way of sort of cradling that object, right? When it arises at the 5 bases. Do you get it? Yeah. But at the point of when our mind steps in now, that is when the distortion takes place. That is when the distortion takes place. Now, distortion is not something which is, what would be the right word to use? It is not something which is imposed, rather it is the result of the mind at the moment. If we are talking about a normal person doing normal things, you know what I mean? Now, for example, someone does something nice to a person, but this person is a crotchety, short-tempered, cynical, grumpy person. A lot of adjectives there. In a nutshell, miserable. Right? So this person does something, or this other person does something good, and this person takes it as something which is bad, or something which was not right, or something which was disrespectful, or something which was unnecessary, right? Now, the imposition of that crotchety man or crotchety person, right, that was not imposed, rather that was a result of his state of mind or state of conditioning. Do you understand what I mean? Yes, it was imposed by his mind, true, true, true. However, it was not really a imposing, or rather change of condition. It was a manifestation of his state of mind. You know, it was not like, okay, deep within this man, there's a good man who, but because, you know, it's not something like that you see at that moment. At that moment, because he's grumpy, the manifestation is grumpy. I feel like I didn't come through properly. No? Again, okay. What? Same example, right? The man is crotchety. Someone does something nice to this, nice for this person. This person takes it in a bad way. Hence, as usual, gets mad at another person. Sounds like a very similar, familiar story, isn't it? Okay, so, so what happens, or how does this happen? Now, the negative elements of mind are manifestations of that current state of mind of the crotchety man. Do you understand? It is not like, right, at that point of time, yes, the man might be warm towards certain people that he considers not a threat, or considers close to him, or as loved ones. Yes, so there's a nice side to him as well. However, at that specific point of time, it was another story. The story was that at that time, the mind was grumpy, crotchety, miserable. So what it manifested was ayoniso manasikara, hence leading to that pleasant natured object to be now cognized as something which is unpleasant, right? Which is unpleasant. Now, taking a step back in our practice allows us to now realize that nature in us, the nature of the object, and the unsuitability of the mechanism of cognition which took place through past reflection. So, Asabha Bhavana, Metta Bhavana, Anicca Sanya, all of these things, well, it's the same thing, isn't it? We don't completely, okay, We don't completely believe. You might disagree, but the fact of the matter is, we try to bring in anicca sanya. If we completely believed in anicca sanya, we would be all enlightened. We would all be enlightened, right? Because that embracing happens when you completely believe, which comes or becomes when we become enlightened. Now what we try to do is we try to impose anicca sanya. Maybe impose is a bad word. We try to bring in or to sort of condition ourselves by anicca sanya, the perception of impermanence. Now that is a sort of a bringing in, right? Because we are bringing in that sort of state of perception or that type of perception. The grumpy man, there is no bringing, it is a manifestation. Because that is a state at which he is in at that specific moment in time. Yes, Chamari, Sanya Vipallasa, right? Sanya Vipallasa, right? Sanya Vipallasa. Sanya Vipallasa is the right word. Thank you, Chamari. Sanya Vipallasa, this distortion, this corruption of mind is then something which exists most of the time in a mind which has the hindrances. It is that sanya, chitta, and ditti vipallasa, right? Perception, consciousness, and view distortion, which keeps us now. We know Dhamma, we know that it is impermanent, we know that there is nothing to cling on to. Theoretically, we know all of this. We've gone through it, right? However, for it, we have not embraced it fully because there are impediments or sort of disturbances, encumbrances or loopholes or potholes in our understanding, which still sort of has distanced us from embracing that reality. Through mindfulness, through meditation, through vipassana, what we get close to is to embracing and not fearing the embracing of that said reality. Right? That's said reality. And we do that by bringing in these sort of contemplations of Dhamma at first, right? Contemplations of Dhamma, foreign contemplations of Dhamma, which we first of all do not believe completely. We know with respect and all of that, yes, we know, yes, this is true, this logically seems correct. However, we don't completely, we are not able to completely embrace the concept at first, but we work with it. Yeah, it is like a acquired paste that you have not yet acquired completely.
Bhante,
Yes,
Bhante,
yeah.
is it it's everyone has a personal inclination, so that personal inclination is the Dhamma you're talking about, yeah? Because personal inclination, because each one has his own sort of preconceived inclination.
There are certain times when these preconceived inclinations do not work. For example, when the Buddha performed the twin miracle,
yeah,
when the Buddha sort of, all those things the Buddha did to sort of for the conceited Sakyas to sort of, discipline the conceited Sakyas. You see, the Sakyas, what does it say? The Sakyas were by nature conceited. They had, so what was their nature, Damsiri? That conceited superiority complex.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the nature. But there are certain times when those natures are overpowered. Right? With stronger javanas or stronger impulsions, which the Buddha created. Now, for example, in motivational speaking, right? To keep people sort of attentive and aware, these motivators, they drop bombs, Time to time they drop sort of, when they stun people. Oh my God, did he just say that? It is quite much like I sometimes you don't expect me to say something and I say it, and you're like, did Bhante just say that? So it's quite much like that, you see, where you sort of spark. You're like, my gosh, you see, that impulsion is the same like that. When you least expect, or when you are not expecting, this sort of extraordinary thing happens, which necessarily doesn't have to be good or bad. However, this out of the ordinary thing happens, which sparks something which defects you from your normal processes of conditioning, right? So yes, true Dhamsari. However, there are certain times when nature does not happen, or nature is not the only thing. For example, let's say you're usually a very rude person, right? However, you are now in the midst of a very respectful, intriguing personality that your rudeness is not now manifesting itself at the moment. Something like that, you see. It is something of that sort. Okay, shall we move on? Any other questions? Okay. It is even possible for javanas, so page number 173, paragraph 1, 2, middle of the paragraph, right? Middle of the second paragraph. It is even possible for javanas accompanied by aversion and displeasure to arise towards a very desirable object. Again, towards a desirable object, the javanas may occur in the mode normally appropriate for a desirable object. We read this, no? Okay. Thus, a masochist may respond to physical pain with chittas rooted in greed and accompanied by joy. So that is exactly chitta, sanya, and ditti vipallasa. All right. That is like the textbook definition of chitta, sanya, and ditti vipallasa. Right? Distortion. You're distorted. Right? Thus, a masochist may respond to physical pain with chittas rooted in greed, with chittas rooted in greed and accompanied by joy, while a meditative monk may contemplate a decaying corpse with wholesome chittas accompanied by knowledge and joy. So that's interesting, isn't it? That's a twist. So it necessarily isn't a bad thing, right? It necessarily isn't a bad thing. There can be good things or knowledge which is brought into a fact of which would usually be something which is dreadful, right? Something which should be sort of akusala or unwholesome based, right? In this connection to etc., this passage is included to show that it is not only the resultant chittas that accord with the object, but also the arahant's functional sense-sphere javanas, right? Also, the arahant's functional sense-sphere javanas. Let's read it and come back to it. When an arahant experiences an extremely desirable object, his javanas occur as one of the four functional chittas accompanied by joy, and the registration chittas as one of the five resultants accompanied by joy. So arahants as well, right? So arahants knows how to enjoy. Right, but here that's that now we kind of now, I mean, that's the beauty of Abhidhamma. Now it's not like hearsay. Now right? Now how it happens, right? Arahant is able to enjoy something, right? And the Arahant does, when you find in the sutras, the arahants, in forest and traveling from forest to forest, from different, from one abode to a different abode. And these places, these forests are beautiful places. These jungles are beautiful places, right? There is an enjoyment in that process. The fact with us is the fact that we enjoy, but we also want to sort of have it forever. That having forever part is a part that we try to get rid of, not the enjoyment part, right? Not the enjoyment part. So, all right, let's move on. When he experiences an undesirable object or a desirable neutral object, the jhanas occur accompanied by equanimity, and the registration chittas as one of the 6 resultants accompanied by equanimity, right? By equanimity. So you will have to highlight that part. You will have to highlight that part, right? Is that clear, everyone? Right? Okay. Okay. Oh, yes, no.
Can I ask a quick question, Bhante?
Even a long question, no, you can ask. Yes.
In there you said the arahants can have 4 beautiful resultants with equanimity, and altogether 6, right? So they are the 4 beautiful resultants with equanimity and the 2 investigating chittas.
Yeah.
But one of them is an unwholesome chitta.
Yeah.
Because it's resultant, is that okay? Or because normally arahants don't get unwholesome chittas, but this is an resultant chitta. Is that the reason?
Yes. I mean, resultant chittas you can. Because, for example, the Buddha experiencing pain when Devadatta rocked that rock down, which hurt him. The Buddha not having a drink of water and going thirsty. The Buddha having diarrhea. All of those were unwholesome resultants, right?
So arahants can have unwholesome resultants.
Absolutely. Arahants can, so if they have an unwholesome resultant, that would mean that of course, they have a bank of past karma, no? Right? Moggallana, when he was killed, when he was murdered, right? At the end of his life, he was murdered, his bones were crushed, right? All of that were unwholesome vipakas, right? But the thing is, unwholesome vipaka, but the way that it is tended to is, of course, another story. Unwholesome vipaka is the way or the mechanism by which the arahant is able to experience whatever which is, right? But of course, the attitude or how he decides to sort of interact with the object is different compared to us, because we will cry and howl and scream and do all of that, right? The arahant would not, right? The arahant would not. So that akusala kamma generation does not happen with the arahant. We would. For us, yes. Right? For us, yes. All right, Noeli? All right. Ravini has a question. What is the difference between the weak object being cognized with the upekka mahavipaka and upekka ahetuka, if I understood it correctly? So what is the difference between the weak object being cognized by upekka mahavipaka and upekka ahetuka? There is no difference. There is no difference. It is both weak, right? So there is no difference in object. However, I imagine that there is a slight variation in the power, right? A slight variation in the power of the karma, which it shifts between ahetuka or mavipaka. However, it is weak, right? It is weak. So sometimes now, for example, if you're doing a good, let's say you're doing a good karma, if you're doing a good karma, but you do it often, so it's like you're a bit blasé about it, nonchalant, because you often do it, right? Now that kind of thing would often develop the base for upekka sahagata mahavipaka to arise in the future rather than somanasa sahagata mahavipaka to arise in the future. Do you understand now how the difference in variation can affect our life? Because you're very nonchalant about it, because you're not very bothered, but you know it's good. You know it's good. However, because you're not sort of making it special, if I may say that, or, I think you understand what I mean in that way of, you do it all the time. So you're a bit nonchalant about it, not in a rude way or not in a bad way, but it's something that you often do. Right? Now, that would give rise to Upekka Sagata Mahavipaka, and Upekka Sagata Mahavipaka is always weaker compared to Somanasa. Right? Compared to Somanasa. So in the role of Patisandhi, that can make a huge difference. Right? In the role of Patisandhi, that can make a huge difference. This difference is the difference between having limbs and not. That kind of difference, right? Because I mean, not to make it sound so sort of, not to make it sound so bad. However, Upekka Sagata Mahavipaka and Somanasa Sagata Mahavipaka, that can both, for example, able to create human birth. However, because of it being Dvihetuka, right? Because it might be Dvihetuka, it can sort of bring certain consequences in terms of the body not being complete or the mind not being complete in those dispositions. Yeah. All right. So, yes.
Can I ask a quick question, Bhante?
Yes, Lucky. Yes, go on.
In this paragraph, it mentions registration. Does it apply only to the clear objects and to very great objects? Is that right? Or
It applies to any object.
any object?
I'm sorry. It refers to an object which is cognized as a great object, any process which has the ending of Tadalambana. So what are the processes which has the ending of Tadalambana? It is a very great object and a great object.
And a clear object, isn't it? Clear object?
If you're taking yes, and a clear object. So any object which has those sort of Tadalambanas in it, which denotes that it's a powerful object to a certain extent.
Right. So this is this paragraph is this what you just read is limited to only that, isn't it? If it's a like obscure object or something, then this does not apply.
Because Lucky, why it doesn't apply is because that object is too weak. Not because of anything else, you see.
Right.
It's like this. It's like your travel is completed when that officer stamps that seal on the passport, right?
Yes.
Almost like arrived. That is when you're like in the country.
Yes.
That Tadalambana is like that seal.
Yeah. Okay, Bhante, thank you.
Bhante.
Yes, Miri.
Yeah, can I just ask, in the, when they say 6 resultants, aren't they talking about the 4 resultants with equanimity, the great resultants with equanimity, and the 2, the Panchadvara and the Manodvara set, Kriya set? Isn't that the 6?
When he experiences an undesirable or desirable neutral object, the javanas occur accompanied by equanimity. The javanas occur accompanied by equanimity and the registration chittas as one of the 6 resultants. One of the 6 resultants accompanied by equanimity, right? So for a arahant, what processes do the Tadalambana process and the Javana process, which are, one, it is a functional resultant, which is functional resultant accompanied by equanimity.
Yeah,
so
that I understand.
Resultant, it includes Manodvara Vajana, Panchadvara Vajana, and that specific vipaka,
I thought it was the functional, it would be the wholesome functionals, wouldn't it? It would
Yes.
be the wholesome functionals,
Yeah.
4 of those, and the other 2 would be the sense door adverting 1 and the 5 door adverting and the mind door adverting
Yes.
1.
Yes.
That will be the 6.
Manudwara Vajana, Panchadwara Vajana, and the Arhanta Vipaka on the 4 on the other side. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Fine. Thank you.
All right. You know how the others know how the 4 came, right? Because we have 8, remember? Right? So 4 is Somanassa, joy, and the other 4 is equanimity. So that 4 and Ahetuka, we have Manodwara Vajana, Panchadwara Vajana, and Hasitupada, smiling consciousness. Right? So we are talking about, so Tadalambana is not done by Hasitupada, right? Right? So we only have Panchadwara Vajana and Manodwara Vajana. So 2 there and 4 on the other side. Right? On the Mahavipaka functional. Got it, everyone? Yes, Padma? Noeline, you wanted to ask something as well? No?
Aren't those last 2 functionals?
Which one?
Manodwara and 5 door adverting.
Exactly. Yes. Those
They're not resultants, then are they? Can you call them resultants?
They are functional resultants. Ahetuka Vipaka.
Okay. Okay.
Right?
Thanks. Yeah.
They're functional results.
Right.
All right. Okay. All right. Moving on.
Bhante, just like what Padma thought, I thought the resultants should be the 4 functional with equanimity, and the 2 in the rootless, there are 2, Upekka Sahagata unwholesome and Upekka Sahagata wholesome. I thought those are the 2 resultants. The last sentence,
Okay.
one of the Miri's question, 6 resultants. The 4 is, after the 6 resultants, 4 would be functional resultants accompanied by equanimity. The other 2, I thought they are rootless with equanimity, 1 unwholesome, 1 wholesome. I thought
Equanimity, what is the rootless one? You have to say exactly. Rootless chitta.
in the rootless chittas, there are 2 upekka sagata ones, 1 unwholesome and 1 wholesome with equanimity.
You're correct.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, when he experiences an undesirable and desirable neutral object, the javanas occur accompanied by equanimity, and registration chittas as one of the 6 resultants accompanied by equanimity. So it should be the resultant functional consciousnesses on the Mahavipaka side.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And because desirable and undesirable object, the sukha, the pleasure and pain, sukha and dukkha vipaka on the ahetuka side. I'm sorry.
Ahetuka. Yeah.
Ahetuka side. Right? Miri, okay? Yes. Okay, so that is how the 6 comes. Apologies.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Thanks, Mala.
Lady Seado, okay. Lady Seado points out that this correlation between the object and the functional javanas of arahants is stated only with reference to the natural mode in which their javanas occur. Right? Again, Lady Seado points out that this correlation between the object and the functional javanas of arahants is stated only with reference to the natural mode in which their javanas occur. However, with the appropriate mental determination, an arahant can arouse chittas accompanied by equanimity towards extremely desirable object and chittas accompanied by joy towards undesirable object. Right? For example, when the Buddha smiled sometime, right? And he would take certain objects. It would be a rare occasion when the Buddha would smile. And he would take different other objects. And because there would be a reason behind that smile, Ananda would always ask him, Bhante, why are you smiling? Right? And then he would explain why. So similar situation here, right? Because of that sense of awareness, you're able to choose, or that attitude by which you're not sort of conditioned by the object, but rather you can decide what it is or how it is that you take it, right? Ladies had a quotes in this connection, the Indriya Bhavana Sutta, right? Here, Ananda, when a bhikkhu sees a form with the eye, there arises what is agreeable. There arises what is disagreeable. There arises what is both agreeable and disagreeable. If he wishes, he dwells perceiving what is repulsive as unrepulsive. If he wishes, he dwells perceiving what is unrepulsive as repulsive. If he wishes, he avoids both the repulsive and unrepulsive, and dwells in equanimity, mindful and clearly comprehending. Yeah? And clearly comprehending. Any questions? Yes, Dil?
So here, when you say bhikkhu, are you looking at a bhikkhu who has progressed and who is not just a trainee, but somebody who has, because if he is going to decide, he's going to change and choose what is repulsive as unrepulsive. It is somebody who is not just a bhikkhu, but by a bhikkhu doesn't mean somebody who has got wisdom and yoniso manasikara. Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if he wishes, if he avoids. Yeah. This is clearly avoiding to the possibility of options that the bhikkhu is able to choose by the power of his clear comprehension, mindfulness, and equanimity. All right. Shall we move on? Adventures Bhavanga. Any questions, anyone? All right.
But just one thing more, sorry. In the page before that whole of that middle part, when you were looking at, the words where they were, I think one of the first questions that you are asking, how is it that you can see an unwholesome thing as wholesome or wholesome things as unwholesome? One of the things was it's because of that word, that because of the proclivities, because you're deciding to choose that way. So really, these are all people who they have just not got the knowledge like what we have got. We know it's bad, but we still do it. But these are all people who have gone beyond that to yoniso manasikara, gone to sati sampajana. These are people who have gone to arahant stages of. So therefore, they choose because they have got the ability of wisdom more than just pure knowledge. Am I right? All these what we were referring to in all these.
I think with this regard, knowledge is not enough.
Yes, that's what I mean. So we are really referring to. Thank you, Bhante. So that in all these things, that's why that word was. You asked that question at the beginning of how is it that you can see one way or the other way, and it's because you have gone beyond that to wisdom and to satipanya that you can do all, because you're choosing to do that because you've got the wisdom, not just the knowledge. Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah,
I think it's clear.
Yeah, I think it is more that ability of this that sort of you do not react.
Yeah.
As instantaneously as the object arises. You have higher ability of focus and concentration, which is not connected to normal things a person would. Yeah? All right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhante.
The Adventures Bhavanga. But at the end of jhavanas, accompanied by displeasure, the registration mind moments and the life continuum are both accompanied by equanimity. But at the end of jhavanas, accompanied by displeasure and registration mind moments and the life continuum are both accompanied by equanimity. Therefore, in the case of one whose rebirth consciousness is accompanied by joy, if at the end of jhavanas accompanied by displeasure, there is no occurrence of registration mind moments, then the teachers explain there arises an investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, apprehending a familiar, trivial object. Immediately after that, there is subsidence into the life continuum. Into the life continuum, right? Let's read that again, please. Right? But at the end of jhavanas accompanied by displeasure, the registration mind movements and the life continuum are both accompanied by equanimity. Right? Therefore, in the case of one whose rebirth consciousness is accompanied by joy, if at the end of jhavanas accompanied by displeasure there is no occurrence of registration mind movements, then the teachers explain there arises an investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, apprehending any familiar, trivial object. Immediately after that, there is subsidence. Immediately after that, there is subsidence into the life continuum, right? Into the life continuum, right? Let's see what that is, right? Let's see what that is. Now, what it is talking about is this buffer between upekha and when the other end, or when the result is going to be something which is of pleasure or something which is of equanimity on the other end, where these two, there's a disparity between these two. So what happens in the middle, right? This is explained here. But at the end of jhavanas accompanied by displeasure, because pleasant feeling and painful feeling are diametrical opposites, because pleasant feeling and painful feelings are diametrical opposites, chittas accompanied by the one cannot arise in immediate succession to chittas accompanied by the other, right? By the other. Understood? Right? However, chittas accompanied by either of these opposed feelings can be immediately preceded or followed by chittas accompanied by neutral feeling. Right? It can have a chitta which arises with a neutral feeling. Thus, when the jhavanas are accompanied by displeasure, domanassa, a chitta rooted in hatred, if there is an occasion of registration chittas, they must be accompanied by equanimity. Do you get it? Right? When the jhavana is unwholesome, the tadarambana is equanimous. Right? This is the buffer. Right? This is how the mind prepares itself for what? For the bhavanga which arises after. Right? Why? Because the bhavanga is what? Now we all have a bhavanga which is trihetuka patisandhi. Trihetuka is all of our bhavangas. Right? But when we get angry, when we have hatred, something which is of opposed nature to the pleasantness of the bhavanga, there is this upekha tadalambana which divides or which stands between that unwholesome or displeasure and that pleasurable feeling, or wholesome pleasurable feeling at the bhavanga, right? This is also called the agantaka bhavanga, right? This is also called the agantaka bhavanga. Now, if there is no scope for registration chittas, jhavanas accompanied by displeasure will be followed immediately by the bhavanga only if the latter is accompanied by an equanimous feeling. Right? Again, If there is no scope for registration chittas, meaning in a chitta viti where there are no registration consciousnesses, right? Then what happens? Javana is accompanied by displeasure will be followed immediately by the bhavanga only if the latter is accompanied by an equanimous feeling, right? Therefore, in the case of one, etc., for someone whose bhavanga is one of the four great resultants accompanied by joy, if there are no registration chittas, following a Javana process accompanied by displeasure, the last Javana chitta cannot be followed by the immediate descent into the bhavanga, owing to the law that chittas with opposite feelings cannot arise in immediate succession. In such a case, the ancient teachers of Abhidhamma hold that an investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity occurs for a single mind moment, serving as a buffer between the displeasure, painful mental feeling, of the Javana and the joy, pleasant mental feeling of the bhavanga, right? Of the bhavanga. On such an occasion, this chitta does not perform the function of investigating. On such an occasion, this chitta does not perform the function of investigating. It takes an object different from that of the cognitive process, some unrelated sense sphere object with which one is already familiar. The functions simply to pave way back to the normal flow of the root bhavanga. This special chitta is termed agantuka bhavanga, the adventitious life continuum, right? Is it understood? Right? What it says is now, this is as mentioned at the last end of the paragraph. It doesn't specifically do anything other than act as a buffer, right? It doesn't do a tada, it doesn't perform the tadalambana function. It is, or it arises only as a buffer to soothe the mind's way back into the bhavanga. Okay? This only happens when polar opposites are arising or would be arising next to each other or after one another, right? After one another. So a rare instance where even if the bhavanga is something which is unwholesome, right? If there's a kusala javana which runs, a wholesome javana which runs, a agantuka bhavanga would come before. If there is no tadalambana, the agantuka bhavanga, and probably there wouldn't be because of the being so weak. If he is born with a akusala bhavanga, right, the being would be very weak, right? What would then happen is an agantuka bhavanga would come to buffer this unwholesome to the wholesome. To buffer the wholesome into, or to soothe its way to that mind which is now going to become unwholesome, because the bhavanga is unwholesome, remember? But in our case, where we all have wholesome trihetuka patisandhi, when we are mad, when we are angry at something, and when we are going to sort of go into the bhavanga, what happens is this tadalambana agantuk bhavanga arises. It doesn't perform the tadalambana function, but what it does is simply buffer the unwholesome mind, where now the mind can soothe its way into what is going to arise next. And what is going to arise next? It is going to be the bhavanga chitta. Do you understand? Yes, dear. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Bhante, I was not. So this is not really so much directly related to this, but a thought that just came into my mind. So in other words, if we are somebody like most people are, say who are here, who are Trihetuka because we are not without limbs or whatever, we are not Dvihetuka, you have a much better chance of having a more neutral Bhavanga Chitta than somebody who has come with Dvihetuka, who has done less merit, because the chances of somebody who is Trihetuka, when even if you have a bad thought, if there's a bad thought, because you can't have a bad thought and a good thought together, there's always this Agantuka Chitta or something that balances it and brings it much more to equanimous Upekka Chitta. So in other words, if you are born with more demerit, or if you're Dvihetuka or something, then your chances really of reacting and responding in a more adverse way is much more than somebody who is Trihetuka. Does that follow? When I'm listening to this, I'm just thinking that's what he's saying. Because if you are Trihetuka, then when you have, because always the Bhavanga Chitta, so actually it seems a bit unfair, but these children who are born with, not unfair, that is karma, I suppose. If you are born with just Dvihetuka or born with, less wholesome roots, then in every way you react more than you respond. Just like in illnesses, in COVID and all, you have much more chance. So you really have very poor life outcomes anyway.
Well, it really depends on the faculties still. Because now, for example, you take the stories of these people who now what Dil is asking is, there are, if a person is born out of Dvihetuka or Ekahetuka or Akusala, out of two roots or one root or unwholesome roots, as a rebirth, is there more potency for that person to remain in that level of consciousness, or is there no chance for this person to have a high level?
More difficult because they are reacting more than responding.
Well, it is really because of the faculties. Now, for example, you take an animal, a dog, right? The Bhavanga we know is weaker. However, happiest animals probably have. You know what I mean? Kindest animals in that sense, right? Now, if we take, for example, let's take a special needs child. It's very difficult sometimes to communicate. It's really difficult to sometimes understand the child, which can cause agitation, which can cause agitation, and the inability for higher states to arise is not only because of the patisandhi, it is because of the faculties, right? It is more because of the faculties which are results of the patisandhi, yes, which is results of the patisandhi. Now, for example, the Buddha says, if you are Dvihetuka or Ekahetuka, you cannot attain Nibbana. Because the wisdom to that extent, according to the Buddha, cannot be developed where you can develop the penetrative wisdom to attain Nibbana. Forget about the penetrative wisdom. Motivating yourself to get up and sit and meditate is also going to be difficult. Right? There are going to be so many more problems in your life. Even if you live a Kamti Kushi life, still the difficulties of your body because of being Ekahetuka. Of course, Ekahetuka will die in the womb, but Dvihetuka, the other complications which would arise is going to be somewhat difficult. However, I think the Dvihetuka, this concept of Dvihetuka and being born, without certain limbs or in that kind of a way, usually it is actually when the mind is affected. Dvihetuka, although we might traditionally say it's going to be like limbs and all of that, really Dvihetuka is going to be more of the mind. Because remember, with regards to the developing of the body, when the body starts to develop, it can be a opposing karma which disrupts that development of that faculty. So you're really born with a trihetuka, but come out looking like a dvihetuka. I'm sorry, very it sounds very unbecoming the way that I'm putting it, but I'm trying to be as polite as possible. But really born with trihetuka, but because of a disruptive karma, disruptive karma, your maybe a limb does not develop in the womb, or eye does not develop in the womb, but still you are trihetuka. You know, but a ekahetuka is going to be, there is no chance. There is no chance. The karma is too weak to go through the process of fertilization in the womb. Right?
But I suppose, Bhante, in the same way, take it to the next step. So if you have all these, like this, you mentioned, when you have these unwholesome things that come and you may have deformity of a limb or whatever, it's not the same as if you, when your mind is affected, like if you're born with Down syndrome or autism or a very low IQ, then obviously the effects of doing all this and choosing things are very much less, because the mind is directly affected. So you won't be able to sit in one place or concentrate, or you won't be restless. So to try to choose and
probably are less, of course.
Yeah. Okay, Bhante. Clear, very clear to me. Thank you, Bhante. The huge implications when you get children who are not as able as normal children or above normal children, which motor mistake has granted, like, but for the parents, what they have to go through all of their lives, and with all what they have to do, how difficult it is to make a child even do, you wouldn't want your children to do wrong things, but suddenly, because I'm a pediatrician, I suddenly thought what an enormous burden, and the parents must have also done that kind of akusal hetu to have a child like that.
Absolutely. It is absolutely an enormous challenge.
Yes, I was just thinking about
a responsibility. And a responsibility.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yes.
Bhante, can I ask you a question, please?
Yes, let us, of course.
Bhante, that you were saying that the trihetukas were also manassa in the resultants, but there are two upekkasahagata trihetuka and the two somanassa sahagata trihetuka.
Yeah. So
in the beautiful lake.
Yeah. The most powerful trihetukas are the somanassas, right? Okay. Now, that is why in this clarification, or in what we have been reading today, we have a clear differentiation between powerful and weak, right? The differentiation here is not between trihetuka, ekahetuka, or dvihetuka. I'm sorry, there are some people, I'm very sorry, there are some people who are not fluent in Pali. The differentiation here is not in having 3 roots, 2 roots, or 1 root. The differentiation here is whether the karma is powerful or of a weaker class. The most powerful being the somanassa sahagata, or the beautiful consciousnesses associated with joy. Right? With joy. And the weaker classes being the upekkalatis. Right? So any of the, so in comparison to the powerful, yes, the upekka is weaker. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah, the reason behind it, of course, I mean, we can understand, I think, that sort of, when you do something with joy, it is almost like multiplying, isn't it? I mean, when you do something out of joy, just imagine, okay, you let's say, when you give to the monks, you're very happy about it, you're bragging about it almost, because, in a wholesome way, Sometimes you give to someone else, maybe you give to a beggar, or a homeless person, or maybe, you know, a homeless shelter or someone, you know, you do that weekly or monthly, and it doesn't, it's like, it's almost as if you're taking food for someone else, or in a way that it is not like a kusala that you sort of think of about it, or you're not like, you know, happy as, you know, doing like a dana ceremony, right? So in that way, there's a disparity. Now, when you are sort of happy about it, you think about it, and every time that you do think about it and you're happy and you're arousing this sense of happiness over that act, it's multiplying, it's multiplying, it's multiplying. You know? Just like, for example, guilt multiplies unwholesome, right? When you do something unwholesome and you're guilty about it and you're sort of fretting over it, you're multiplying the unwholesome, right? Which is something that the Buddha says not to do, right? Rather, you understand the action and you determine against the action in the future, and then you move on, right? So this sense of joy multiplies that sense of, you know, that does. Yes, Mala.
Bhante, is very interesting what you said just now, because when you do a meritorious deed like a dana, it makes a difference whether you do it with enthusiasm or just without any under obligation. You just give the dana, because it makes it can bring your from joy, it can bring down to upekka if you are not very keen on it.
Yeah.
Because it can it are downgraded. So, but if you do it with joy, even if you whatever you do, you are, it's getting like an upgrade, automatic upgrade, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because it affects your patisandhi also. Whether it's upekka or other joy, it makes a difference to your patisandhi also. So it doesn't make any sort of, you don't have to pay any money extra or anything. It's just the enthusiasm that counts.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
But can I just, and this taken to another extent, this is why even if you go for a job interview, or if you are passionate, not, you know, if you are enthusiastic, if you're passionate, it radiates from you. It's an energy, that a very positive energy that happens. And that's why you always say peace and bliss and nibbana. In other words, the very subtle thing when you're doing things, and without going to all the little differentiations which of the chittas and the chaitasikas, as soon as you feel a little bit not quite normal, but a little bit irritated or frustrated, you've sunk into a lower level. It doesn't have to be resentment or guilt or, you know, judgment and blame. That slight difference you feel at once, because that's a negative emotion. But if you feel a little bit enthusiastic or happy or passionate, see, the whole of what you do, it gets uplifted. And so whatever you do, just like a dana, you get very much, well, whether you give a sermon or whether you do anything, a job or teach or do anything, that passion gets transferred into the recipients as well. And this is why people always say, if somebody is doing very well, first question they ask is, she must be passionate or she must be enthusiastic, because that is such a positive vehicle and an energy that gets transmitted not only to you when you get uplifted. And even Bhante, when you are meditating, you're always saying, you know, smile, relax. Why is that? Because otherwise, if you're very serious and if you're very trying to force, and if you're trying to force outcomes, and, you know, you try to, there's some kind of, as relaxation is more allowance, while that kind of thing is more resistance, Bhante. You're always correcting us. I mean, all of us who come on the screen, you know, you always say relax a little bit when you say something, for that same reason, don't you, Bhante?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was going to say something and I forgot, but yeah, the Buddha says, following that point, the Buddha says, those who are unwise would captivate themselves from by the misfortunes of the world. That means, is that person deserving of my dana? Is that person worthy of my time? You know, the one who is unwise would sort of captivate onto that. The wise would do what they ought to do, and they would liberate themselves from samsara. You know, and that is very beautiful, because as long as our wholesome mind or our enthusiasm is dependent upon another person, we are forever going to be unwisely dependent, unwisely. Ayoniso manasikara, right? And that is, I think, yesterday I was talking to, my sort of head monk, and we were just chatting for about the Chabbagya bhikkhus, and the Chabbagya bhikkhus, they were at the time of the Buddha, and they were rascals. Right, and they were the troublemakers, they were rascals, and the Chabbagya's, a lot of the Vinaya rules promulgated in the Tipitaka are about the Chabbagya bhikkhus. And for example, one of the rules is bhikkhus, monks are not supposed to butter up lay people. Right, they're not supposed to butter up, and if they do, it is an offense of wrongdoing. If they continue to do it, the Sangha can get together and excommunicate the monk and ban the monk from the village. Right, so basically all the monks can, so for example, let's say I am the one who is buttering everyone up, so this Sangha can get together, ask me what the hell I'm doing, and then get me to explain myself. And if the monks find me at fault, they will tell me, okay, this is the boundary, you're not supposed to enter this for 20 years. Right, and they can excommunicate me. Why? Not for any other reason, because at the time the Chabbagyas had a lot of followers. Why? Because the Chabbagyas were friendly, they were so, they would even babysit for the lay people, and they would be sort of friendly, and the lay people sort of became very close to Chabbag. Some of the lay people became very close to Chabbag because they were friendly and they were caring, and all of these things, but the Chabbagyas also used to do things like, for example, they used to, get the ladies to dress up with the robes, and the ladies used to dance with the robes. It used to be a whole party, you see. Like for example, in the movies we see like the king and the ladies dancing in front of the kings, and so like that the Chabbagyas used to be sitting around and the ladies used to be dancing, and this happened during the time of the Buddha. Right, and we were just I was just talking with my master about this how the Chabbagya sort of, the concept of those Chabbagya. For example, when you give a big dana, or if anyone does in Sri Lankan culture, we expect the anumodana to be very praiseworthy, right? And if you're not, and this is very serious business, if it is not praiseworthy, sometimes people get very, very uneasy, and people get very, very agitated, and they respond in very, very negative ways in certain places. But the thing is, that praise that we would give, if it is done to make or to sort of butter up, right, and you understand what I mean by that, then the monk is not supposed to do that in the first place. The praising should be of the action, not of the person. Right? The praising should be of the action, not of the person, because in that you're sort of conceiting. So you see, that is why I think in this... I think that is why in this day and age, we need to be quite attentive and aware, because we do not want, because we have this rare Dhamma, and we do not want to sort of, be agitating or giving rise to things that sort of take us away from it. So anyways, moving on. So that is the importance of having that enthusiasm. Right? But that enthusiasm, remember, it is something which is wholly on the grounds of wisdom, understanding, not on the grounds of conceit or anything which is bad. Avidya pacchaya sankhara. Avidya pacchaya sankhara, or avidya, is if anything leads to suffering, that is avidya. Right? Dukkha lakkana avidya. Avidya is or has the characteristic of dukkha as a result. Right? So anything in our minds, if when it is missing, it causes suffering, that base is avidya. Do you understand? Right? Now, for example, let's say this mug, right? This mug is there, it is very useful. I mean, it's a jar, not a mug, I'm sorry. It's a jar, a hamishi jar. Okay, so this jar, right? When it is missing, if I'm going to now have a sense of suffering, right? Because that jar is missing, that base which connected me and the jar, or the way that I thought of the jar, is based in avidya. Right? Avidya, every result of ignorance is going to be suffering. Ignorance never has pleasure as a result. Do you understand? Think about it, right? I mean, we are doing Paticcasamuppada now, right? Dukkha lakkana avidya, right? So avidya will always have. So when, for example, even with an unwholesome karma, even with a wholesome karma that you do, right? If that connection, if you see the purpose behind it, and if that is no longer going to be there in the future, if that creates a sense of suffering in your mind, for example, in the anumodana, if they're not going to praise you enough, if they're not going to thank you enough, right? And now you feel a sense of suffering. Oh my God, they didn't even thank me, right? That is avidya there, right there again, right? This is not to say, this is wholly to say, do not be concerned with the value of the world. Be concerned with the value that is within yourself and in your actions. That's the important part, right? If our parents were to count everything and expect a return on everything that they have given us, my God. Right? If you as parents now are going to do that to your kids, you're going to forever be in sadness. They're never going to be able to fulfill. Right? I mean, see how powerful that is. Right? That element of not having that ignorance, that is liberating. Right? And that ignorance itself is the fact that you think that there should be repayment, that there should be a recourse, that there should be a return. No, it is about us, our actions. We choose to do it. If you choose to do it, it's only you. Yeah? Okay. All right. So it is 8:30.